Great, okay. So morning, everybody, especially morning to the people in the room. It's really nice to see people in real life in 3D. There's some people I've only met on screens before, so it's very nice to see what the backs of their heads look like, as the fronts of them. My name's Beck Hanley, and I'm the facilitator of a group called the Shared Learning Group on Involvement. Some people in this room are members of that group, so that's a group of charities that are committed to supporting their staff to make sure they can work in partnership with people with lived experience. So just a couple of housekeeping things. This bit of the session, so the talks and Q&A bit of this session is being recorded. So just to warn you, if you're going to say anything really indiscreet, you might want to disguise your voice or not say who you are. And if you are online, so it's a hybrid session. Last time I heard there were 86 people online, so big welcome to them as well. But if you are online, we're going to ask you to add your questions into the chat. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you. We've only just started, so you're all right. So if you're online, can you add your questions to the chat? And Katie, who's from NPC, will be making sure that we can take those as well as questions in the room. So unless you took the wrong turning at the top of the stairs, hopefully you're here because we're launching, or NPC is launching, this new guidance today, which I am really excited about because I think it fills a bit of a gap in the market. So as you will know, if you are active in this field, there are a lot of guides to how we can do whatever the terminology is at the moment. This guide calls it centering lived experience, but how can we really work in partnership with people with lived experience? So there's been lots of guides about that. But I think the way that this guide is different is that it talks to senior leaders. And if we don't get senior leaders on board, we are only ever going to get part way through that journey. It's just going to get stopped. So I think this is a really important guide. And it's about how you embed involvement into your organisation. I'm just going to say a little quick thing about language. So I've just used the term involvement. Lydia, when she's talking, I know is going to use the term participation. I don't think it matters today. We're all going to use different terms. You can choose to get wound up by terms if you want to, but really I ask you not to today because we use different terms. And what we're talking about, whichever term is being used, is it's about putting that people with lived experience at the centre of what you're doing. So back to the guide and back to this morning. So today we're going to hear some headlines from the guide. Naomi's going to talk you through it in a minute. And then we're going to hear, which I think is going to be really interesting, not that Naomi isn't going to be interesting, but some perspectives from people who've been involved in the guide and helped to shape it. So we're going to have a panel joining us, some in the room and some online in a bit. I should also say thank you very much, in case they're here, or even if they're not here, to the City Bridge Foundation, who funded this guide, so good on them. And I found out at the weekend that they're called the City Bridge Foundation because they get their money from the city's bridges, which is great, I didn't know that. But before we start, I'm going to ask you if you would be willing to fill in a poll on Mentimeter. So I'm going to ask you if you've got your phones with you, whether you're online or in the room. I'm going to ask you to go into menti.com. So some of you might know that organisation already, Menti, MENTI.com. And then there is a code to use, which is 26188631, and we're asking you what kind of organisation that you're representing. So that is our first question on Menti. Just give you a minute to fill that in. So if you haven't, if you haven't got to the code yet, it's 26188631. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to fill in that poll. If you haven't filled it in and you want to, could you please fill it in now so that we can then have a little reflect on it?
There are 3 questions in this.
Okay. So the first question we're asking you is, what kind of organisation are you representing? And really interestingly, almost all of us work in charities or are representing charities here, either as paid or non-paid people in that organisation. And the second question, Naomi. So we're now asking, oh,
sorry.
We're now asking you, which of the following best describes your role in that organisation? Okay. Now, this is really heartening, isn't it? I think sometimes what happens when we produce stuff about centering lived experience, you don't get people from senior leadership teams, they pass it down in their organisations. But this is great that a lot of people who are here are saying they are from senior leadership teams, other people calling themselves staff or experts by experience, or they're from trustees. So that is really, really good. Thank you very much. And the third question is about where you think you are on your journey to centering lived experience. So try not to show off here and say, like, I've done it all. You'll know that isn't true. But just asking you, where do you think you are on that spectrum? How far do you think you've got? Do you think we're done on that one? Yeah. So that's also really interesting, isn't it? We've got this lovely curve, and most people are sitting roughly in the middle of it. But there are some people who are saying, I think I'm a sector leader in that space. Good on you. We need leaders in this space. It's really, really important. But some people saying, well, I'm quite at the start of this journey. So some of us are working in organisations that are only just getting going. The really good news is there's people ahead of us, so we can stand on the shoulders of those giants to move us forward. And I think that's what is really important, that we don't feel that we all have to make it up on our own, that we can really learn from each other, whatever sector we work in. So you may not work mainly with young women, but you've got things to learn from the Young Women's Trust in this field, for example. Okay, so thank you for that. So I'm going to move on now, and what we're going to do first in the kind of speakers bit of the morning is we're going to hear from Naomi Chapman. So Naomi is a senior consultant at MPC, and I really appreciate her taking the time to come up to London today. She's come up from Devon. She said it took her 6 hours yesterday. Don't you love the trains in this country? So she's going to be talking about the kind of the headlines from this guide. And then we're going to take questions afterwards. So I'm going to ask you not to ask her questions during her presentation. If you're online, feel free to put questions into the chat because we're going to be coming to them afterwards. If you're in the room, just jot down your questions and we'll come to you after Naomi's presentation. So she's going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. Do you want me to give you a nod?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay.
Hopefully it won't be that long.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to give you a real nudge at 14. But right. Yeah. Okay, so Naomi, off you go.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone, welcome. I must admit we're using this weird owl camera and I have absolutely no idea where to look to say hello to people online, but please be assured that I am welcoming you too, and welcome to today's event about how we can centre lived experience. As we said, today's event marks the launch of MPC's new guide in this area, Centering Lived Experience, a strategic approach for leaders. And this is the culmination of a year-long research project that's been led by MPC. But before we get started on the content of that, I really wanted to acknowledge that this wasn't an individual project that we did on our own. This was a really collaborative piece of work. So I just want to say thank you to our steering group who guided this overarching work, Angela Newton, Antonio Ferreira, Beck Hanley, David Ford and Josh Parsons, to our research partners for sharing their expertise and their time and being open and honest collaborators on this. They're listed on the slide, but shout out Cancer Research UK, Criminal Justice Alliance, Refugee Action, Rethink Mental Illness, Revolving Doors, Sister St Basil's, Young Manchester, Young Women's Trust, and Your Voice Counts. Lots of these organisations are the sector leaders in the space, but lots of them didn't feel as confident, but were really open and honest with us and sharing what had worked and hadn't worked in their practice. And lastly, thank you to the City Bridge Foundation for their generous contribution towards this work. We're sharing the guide today under a Creative Commons license that gives our partners and anyone interested in this work the chance to share it, use its content, adapt it as you see fit. So please do read it, but also use it in a way that is useful for you and your practice, informing your own involvement work and to influence others around you. Okay, that's all the kind of preamble. We can get into the content. So, as many of you here today will know, the charity sector is now recognising the value of lived experience, and that's largely thanks to a movement led by leaders with lived experience and passionate advocates for this work over the years. And this value can include lots of things, including stronger organisational identity for your charity, a greater sense of audience belonging in your work, challenge perceptions of who can lead social change, whether that's within the charity sector or beyond, and the increased relevance and impact of the work that you are delivering. But what we found through this work is that a lot of this value is missed when a charity takes a kind of ad hoc or programme by programme approach to involvement. Charities need to approach lived experience strategically to maximise the impact both on experts by experience, but also the impact on the charity and the services themselves. We recognise that it's really difficult for senior leaders in the space to prioritise lived experience over all of the competing agendas that you contend with every day, and that it's especially difficult to properly resource, and that's something we are thinking about within and beyond this work. But the response to these barriers shouldn't be to ignore involvement work or to make it a one-off exercise. Charity leaders should still be ambitious about this work, even if the journey ahead is a long one. Before we get into the findings of our research, I just wanted to acknowledge, as Beck did, that a lot of the language that is used to describe people with lived experience or this work is often highly contested, and so terms that some people find appropriate are not welcomed by others, etc. We've used what we felt was the most widely understood language in the guide, but as I say, you're welcome to adapt this, put this in the terms that you use in your subsector when you're thinking about your own work. So what does meaningful work to centre lived experience look like? Overall, involvement is meaningful when it is actually changing what you do, how you do it, and the impact that you have. It also needs to benefit the experts by experience involved. It can't just be extractive. From our conversations with our research partners, we identified 12 attributes of charities that are doing this work meaningfully. So firstly, these charities have committed senior leaders who prioritise this work, who are excited and enthusiastic about the potential of centering lived experience within their organisation. These charities are willing to do things differently. They alter their existing processes and structures, such as meeting formats and times, or how skills required are shared between a team. These charities have a clear shared purpose for involvement work. There is clarity around why lived experience is being centred and what the charity hopes will be different as a result. These charities have lived experience embedded within their strategies, which emphasises its importance and gives staff permission to spend time and resources on doing it and doing it well. These charities are ambitious but realistic. As I say, we all have limited resources, and especially for involvement work. And so these resources need to be prioritised effectively, and where resources are limited, less is done well rather than overcommitments made. These charities let lived experience influence strategic and operational decisions. These might be service design, peer research projects, or board-level strategic decisions. These charities ensure that lived experience is shared early rather than bringing it in after the bulk of decisions have been made. There needs to still be room for input from experts by experience to make a difference to the outcome of both strategic and operational decisions. These charities value relationship and build trust so that everyone can engage fully and feel confident to provide input and challenge. And time and resources need to be allocated to the building of relationships and trust. These charities have a culture of openness and flexibility, with an organisational mindset that is open to change and adapting and makes change and flexibility the norm. These charities are transparent about the role of lived experience in their work and give experts by experience clarity over the level of influence that their input will have on a decision or an output, which again builds trust and avoids disappointment and frustration in that process. These charities support everyone to engage, including staff and experts by experience, for example, by paying travel expenses, putting in time to prepare for meetings ahead of time, providing training, or providing safe spaces to break out of decision-making forums. And finally, these charities place continuous learning and improvement high on the agenda, having processes to capture learning, and a culture of continuous improvement, which increases the impact of centering lived experience on an ongoing basis. This isn't a one-off exercise. We need to learn, refine, and improve our processes for centering lived experience. So that's what we're working to achieve. How do we get there? The guide launched today has 4 steps, and it's flexible how you use them. You could use the 1 or 2 steps that feel relevant to where your organisation is right now, or you could follow every step in order. Steps 1 and 2 are sort of finite processes that we recommend you start with, and you can scale up and down the extent of these depending on the size of your organisation and the timelines that you're working to. Steps 3 and 4 are then much more likely to be ongoing, iterative processes that happens over a longer timeline. Throughout all of these steps, it is important that people with lived experience are feeding into and shaping the decisions that you're making. So the first step is around preparing and exploring the scope of your centering lived experience work. So firstly, you need to build buy-in to do this meaningfully. It's not enough for one senior leader to hold the torch for this work in your organisation. Everyone must be on board with the kind of change required. So you need to galvanise your allies, create spaces for discussion with those who are less enthused. You need to reflect on where you are as an organisation. What's the wider context of your work? Where are you in your strategy cycle? What might the cultural barriers and opportunities be? And what role is involvement currently playing in your decision-making processes? This might leave you feeling overwhelmed and feeling like now is not the right time, but we recommend still working through these steps and then factoring that reflection into the timelines you put in place for steps 3 and 4. The first step is also a good time to learn from others, speaking to experts by experience and peer organisations that might be elsewhere on the journey to you. The second step is around defining the purpose of lived experience work at your organisation. So defining the why. How does this work relate to your vision, your mission, your values? What does good look like for you as an organisation? And that might be very different to other organisations in your field. This is where you'll think about learning. You will not get this right the first time or even the second, so have a way to understand how it's going and how to improve. And then also thinking about when. Sorry, 2 seconds. Thinking about when, so setting the timelines of this work, being realistic that this work takes time, both in terms of the amount of time you invest, but also elapsed time. People need space to reflect, to go away, and all of that means that timelines are long. Then as we get into step 3 and the more practical elements, you go into kind of developing your approach to delivering on that vision, mission, and values for your involvement work. So developing this approach is going to take time. And as I said earlier, it's fine to set a really ambitious goal in steps 1 and 2, but then take quite small steps as you get into the delivery. Here you need to consider what, who, and how. So what do you want lived experience to influence? Your governance, your research, your delivery, your recruitment. What type of involvement is right? There are a whole spectrum of approaches to involvement, and different methods will be most appropriate and useful depending on the context. It's a trade-off between depth and breadth of involvement, and no one kind or one end of the spectrum is better than others. And what skills do we as an organisation need to develop and acquire to deliver this work? That leads us on to the who. Who is actually going to make this happen? What status do they have in this organisation? How are you showing the importance and the value of this work? And how does everyone see centering lived experience as a key part of their role? And lastly, how will you resource and fund this work? The final step is around delivery and actually practically doing it. And around here, our guidance is more around considerations to have in mind as you deliver, rather than set ways that every organisation should be delivering this work. So you need to make sure that delivery is ethical and avoids tokenistic activity or work that exploits or re-traumatises an expert by experience. Here you need to think about the balance between privacy and storytelling, safeguarding, the processes you need to build confidence, and the feedback loops between experts by experience, staff, and senior leaders. You also need to ensure that lived experience is providing you diverse insight and that your recruitment removes barriers to entry and makes engagement inclusive on an ongoing basis. And this is where you need to learn from what works, change your processes, and go back to earlier steps where needed. And my final slide, as we saw on the slide, it's great to see there are so many kind of senior leaders with us here at the event today, but we're also conscious that the majority aren't senior leaders. And so we still want this guide to be useful to you. As we saw, we recognise that this work is often championed elsewhere in an organisation by passionate staff or volunteers or experts by experience. So what you can do in this role is early on, you can raise awareness about the importance of this work. You can frame the guidance and do that work about taking what we've produced, which is a guide that's hoping to be useful across the sector and placing it in the context of the work that you are doing and making the case, beginning that work of getting allies on board and getting buy-in to centering lived experience. Later on in the process, you can show the importance of leadership versus delegation, making the case to senior leaders where there is an area which they really need to take ownership of and drive forward versus where they can delegate and where you can take forward some of that delivery. You can highlight synergies and opportunities between other areas of your work and influence the approach that gets taken as you move into delivery. You also have a crucial role in feeding back some of that learning and insight so that the insight that's coming from the experts by experience and from the processes you're going through informs future processes and future strategy around this work. And as I said previously, experts by experience need to be informing decision-making throughout all 4 steps. So this is really just a whistle-stop tour of the guidance that we launched today, hopefully giving you a flavour, but there is much more detail in the full version. Do go to the NPC website to give it a read and share with your colleagues. You'll all get a link to that after today's session, but I'm going to stop talking and let you hear from some of our research partners about their experience of doing this work in practice. Back to you, Beck. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Naomi. I do appreciate that is a lot to take in when you haven't seen the guide, but you can see it now. You can download it from the NPC website and print it out. So what I'm going to do before we go to the panel is I'm just going to see if we have any questions for Naomi. So I'm going to just look around the room first, and then I'm going to ask Katie if there's any questions online. So anybody in the room want to ask a question or make a comment about the guide that I know you haven't read yet? And Katie, is there anyone online?
There's just one question which Naomi might want to take, but it might also be good to feed into the panel discussion as well. But actually, just in the second one as well, I'll give you 2 at once then. Can an organisation claim to be a lived experience one if it's not been set up by people with lived experience in the first place? And then the other one that's just come in, are there spaces for organisations on their central lived experience journey to come together and share best practice, which I'm sure Beck and nobody else will have views on. But yeah, Naomi.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that first question is really interesting, and I think it depends. We've had lots of conversations about how you can actually make sure that this is an embedded change that an organisation makes. So making the commitment, for example, to updating your governing document so that it embeds some of these commitments to centering lived experience, rather than it potentially being something that comes into the leadership of organisation and then moves away. I think that every organisation has its history and its origins, and that shouldn't stop an organisation moving towards a place of centred lived experience. But I also think there's a lot of value in lived experience founded organisations. I might let Beck take the question on those where you can go to share learning, because that is your space.
I think, but just to say about that question, I think that is a really good question. If you work in an organisation that has like a very medical model background, so some people here will be working for charities that were set up by doctors or all sorts of people. I think it doesn't mean you can't do this. It just might mean you're starting at a different place. And actually some charities that were set up by people with lived experience, as they get bigger, they can lose the sense of where their roots started. So I do think it's interesting. In terms of where you can share your experience, whether good or bad, I'm going to name 2 groupings. So one is the grouping that I support, the shared learning group on involvement. Calling it an organisation makes it sound very grown up. It's not at all, but it's a coming together of charities, as I said, that are interested in learning from each other about how do you centre lived experience. There's about 50 charities that are members of that group, and you can Google shared learning group on involvement and find it online. The other grouping is a group that Josh Parsont, who I'm just going to point to in the room, co-chairs. Josh is from Barnardo's, and he co-chairs a similar group that looks at how do you support the participation of young people in particular. So we talk to each other, some of his members are members of our group and vice versa. So I think if you work with older people, you can learn from charities that involve children and vice versa. But there's 2 organisations that you can go to. There's a sliding scale of a membership fee to join the organisation that I work with. Josh's organisation is free. So yeah, is that enough, Josh?
What was the name of the second organisation?
National Participation Forum.
So yeah, it's very kind of informal. So
Can
I would
I,
just, I can.
Josh,
my
hang
email
on a minute,
address
can I
is
just check that you can be heard online? We're going to bring you a microphone. Sorry.
somewhere very official.
I know. Hybrid meetings are scary.
So the National Participation Forum, so it's a collaborative group really, very informal. There's no website, there's no email address, there's nobody in the background. So it's just facilitated between Bernardo, Save the Children, and as of very recently, the Children's Society. So I'm happy to leave my email address. I can leave some of those comments.
Thank you.
And they talk about really interesting things, but what's very interesting is we often talk about the same stuff. Everybody wants to talk about similar things. So diversity, how do you capture impact, how do you influence senior leaders? Yeah, all those things, they come up at both. Okay, so thank you for those questions. Katie, no others online?
I think just so, actually, personally, one of the original question is asked to build on it and just say, is there a risk that generalist organisations will now try to portray themselves as lived experience organisations? So either feel free to address that now or pick it up with the panel later.
Maybe we can pick that up with the panel discussion.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
all right to that person who raised that. So I'm going to move on to the panel discussion now. And this is a panel of people who all were involved in the development of this guide. Some of them are online, some of them are in the room. NPC checked the technology before we started, so I'm really hoping for the online speakers that it's still going to work when we start. But just to say who the panel are. Mo Omar is Head of Experts by Experience and Partnerships at Refugee Action. Christina Gates is Co-Chair at Your Voice Counts. Lydia Morgan is Head of Participation at Young Women's Trust. And Becky Buttman and Zoe Anderson are members of the Young Women's Trust Advisory Panel. So I was just going to say, can I ask them to come up? Well done, team. And I'm going to give you the microphones in a minute.
Great.
I'll move up.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
If you're joining online, I apologise if everything is swinging around. I hate that when that happens. Gets you to giddy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each panel member one thing, and then I'm going to move over to you guys and people online asking whatever you'd like to ask of the panel. But they've had like chance to think about their response to this question, and it also means we make sure we hear from everybody. So I'm just going to go round and ask them the question. So Mo, you're online. I can see you there. So my question to you is, how does Refugee Action centre lived experience, and what's your role in that?
Thanks for that question, and I hope you can hear me okay. First of all, centering EBEs, that's the term we use at Refugee Action, is a key strategic commitment for us. And of course, we are on our own journey and commitment, and we also have our own blind spots on central lived experience generally. And some of the key things we do at Refugee Action include, first of all, representation, because we believe that representation matters, and across the board, looking, for example, at our trustees, members, and making sure that there's lived experience representation in there. Also at the SLT level, ensuring that EBs are represented there, and having specific targets across different teams within the organization, just to ensure that the culture of the organization is embedded and centering lived experience and in everything that we do. That's in relation to representation. And secondly is the processes and the strategy development of the organization. In terms of processes, for example, if we look at our recruitment, we ensure that the panelists have lived experience represented in there in terms of who's who's joining the organization, there's that insight and the valuing of that aspects, and including the questions that we ask, making sure that those the candidates that are putting themselves forward at the organizations have insights and appreciation of what we're trying to do within the organization, and also within generally in our work, in our programs, for example, within my team, the good practice and partnership team, making sure that we have programs that have lived experience components into it, so that we can also work with partners. So not only doing it internal refugee action, but also trying to influence and work with partners on how we do lived experience. That's very important. And our strategy development is key, and making sure that our strategies are developed with people lived experience. And so those are the key structures that we put in place at Refugee Action in terms of centering EBs. And my role in terms of my role in making sure that this happens, it's is to focus in maximizing how lived experience happens at Refugee Action, but also looking at the word influence, on how lived experience are influencing the culture and behavior and across the board, and trying to ensure that we support others in the refugee and asylum support sector.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Mo. Really, really interesting. Thank you. And I'm sure we're going to come back to you a bit later on when we get questions from the room. Lydia, you've got a similar job at Young Women's Trust. So how do you and your team, which I know is not a big team, but how do you and your team support other staff to centre people with lived experience in your organisation?
Thanks, Beck, and thanks so much for having me here today. I thought it might be helpful just to give you a little bit of context about the size of our organisation as well. So we have 27 staff, so we're fairly small, I guess, in some ways, maybe compared to some of the other organisations in the room. But we do have, there's 4 people in my team, including myself, in the participation. So I have 2 participation officers, an administrator, and then myself. We sit within the services and participation department. And so, yeah, basically what we do is we kind of act as consultants or sounding boards with other teams across the organisation. We do lead on some of the participation work with the advisory panel, so the kind of cross-cutting work that we do across the organisation with our strategy and governance and those sorts of things. That's what my team looks after. We look after the advisory panel, and Zoe's going to talk a little bit about what they do. And we also have a closed Facebook group called the YWT Lounge that we look after as well. But in terms of supporting other teams to do this sort of work, yeah, we sort of act more as consultants and sounding boards with them. We meet with them annually around our business planning. So once they know what they've got coming up in the next year, we'll sit down with them and think about, okay, well, what are the ways that young women can be involved, both in shaping your work, but also advocating for change. So that's 2 sort of areas that we focus on. And then throughout the year, the members of my team, the 2 officers, will meet with specific colleagues across the organisation who have an element of involvement attached to their role, and they will support them to do some of these activities. So an example could be with our peer researchers, for example. So the officer in my team will catch up with our research lead probably fortnightly, and support the work that we're doing with peer researchers in terms of shaping our research, looking at session plans together, thinking about how they can make it really accessible, thinking about different strategies to use to engage our peer researchers and supporting them through that process as well. So I guess the sorts of things that come up from staff and sort of support that they need is around, how can they make sessions really accessible and inclusive, and how can they get a really diverse range of voices in the room. They might want some tips on facilitation. And then they might also need, so if they're starting a new project, they might come to us and say, okay, we've got this new project, we definitely want young women involved. What could that look like throughout the lifespan of the project? So that might be setting up a separate group of young women to kind of feed directly in and work throughout and co-sign throughout. Or it could be like different workshops, like look really differently for different things. It depends on the resource and the time and that sort of stuff. And then one other thing actually is that my team also do kind of like spotlight sessions throughout the year where staff, or drop-ins maybe is another way that you could, where staff can come along and we can kind of share some of these skills so that they feel equipped to be able to do some of this work with young men without us necessarily being there all the time.
Thank you. And it's interesting already, the similarities between some of the things you've talked about and some of the things that Mo talked about. So thank you for that. I might go to Zoe next because she's in the room, if that's all right. So, Zoe, what makes you feel like you're making a difference at Young Women's Trust? You turn the microphone on to Zoe. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here as well. So as Lydia said, I'm part of the advisory panel. So we are a group of young women with lived experience who steer the direction of Young Women's Trust. And, you know, we have a hand in all of the direction where they go. We meet online and in person twice a year, but aside from that, we do lots of other things like meeting with trustees, and really like we're very ingrained in steering what Young Women's Trust does. And I think for me, a big reason that I can tell I'm making a difference and continuously know that I'm making a difference or I'm impacting what Young Women's Trust does is that they tell us. So we just had a residential a couple of weeks ago, last month, and afterwards, after we've done all of the talking, the strategizing, etc., we get a pack in the post, and it tells us what we spoke about and how it's going to be actioned. So they're continuously accountable to us when we've spoken to them. And Lydia also mentioned peer research as well. I was a peer researcher, and that was a really interesting one because it was people with lived experience talking to people with lived experience. And that was amazing because you would see in the final, research or, I forget the word, but the piece of research that would come out of it, you would have quotes from the interviews that you conducted, and you would see all of that down on paper, the work that you did. So that and many other reasons, it just feels like they're completely accountable to what we discuss and the things that we want to put in place.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I love the thing that you talk about the importance of feeding back, like not just listening and saying you'll do something, but actually then coming back to people, telling them what they said and what you're going to do. Well done, guys. Okay. So, Becky, I know I feel like I keep turning around, which must look a bit odd online, but anyway, hello, Becky, nice to see you. And my question to you is it important that you can influence Young Women's Trust, and why?
Yeah, hiya, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Nice, thanks for having me. Again, I'm remote because I've got a 5-month-old in the next room, so that's why. But it's nice to see you all. And yeah, I think it's really important that we have influence, and I would say it's basically like central to our role. Essentially, we are just a lot of the opportunities that we do throughout the year are like this, speaking on this panel, or sharing our own experience, or speaking to MPs, influencing campaigns or strategies, and hopefully, and like centering young women's voices. It's basically what we do, and I think it helps us sort of see, like Zoe was saying, being able to see the difference it makes, and working with the staff at Young Women's Trust. It feels very like a safe environment and very trusted, and it feels like we can share a lot and you can see the tangible differences that are being made. And also in ourselves, like I think women that join it, I joined it with very low self-confidence and self-esteem, and now I'm like talking on panels. And I did a recent panel talk with Galaxy and The Independent to a huge audience, and I wouldn't have said I would do that years ago, but I did, and it was amazing. And I felt like if I can help somebody else by sharing my own experience, that's amazing. And raise money, that's also insane. Like I think it's a really great opportunity that I've been given, and that all the young women have been given, and you meet people that are similar to you. I'm kind of rambling now because it's a great place to work and things to do, but yeah, it's very important that we have influence because it makes us want to stay there and contribute more and actually give as much as we can give instead of kind of holding back, because it doesn't feel like tokenistic. We're giving everything we can give because we care and we can see the difference and the influence that we have. Yeah.
And can I add something to
You're allowed. Go.
Thank you. Like one big thing as well, I think Becca will probably agree, is that the community that, you know, is created around the fact that we all get together and share our lived experience is major. So Becky mentioned the Galaxy event she spoke at, which she absolutely smashed out the park and was really pregnant when she did it as well. So it was incredible. And I was in the audience for that. So, you know, it creates these, or at least like an offshoot of it is creating these relationships that like are so important and give you a sense of community around that. Yeah.
I think that is so important. It isn't just about the value that it adds to the organisation, it's the value that it can add to the people who get involved. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Well done, Becky. Sounds awesome what you did. Christina, last but not least, I'm gonna come to you. So Christina's also online, and I really want to ask you about governance, because that's something that often gets missed out when we talk about how you centre lived experience. So how do things need to change to make sure that lived experience is central at that level?
Yeah, so just for anyone that doesn't know, Your Voice Counts is a charity based in the northeast of England, and we provide advocacy and support predominantly for people with learning disabilities and mental health issues. And we've had experts by experience, as we call them, on our board since we began. So it's something that is just something we do. So it was really interesting thinking about, oh, what do we need to think about? So there really needs to be that strong culture of inclusion and willingness with senior leaders and the wider staff, as well as the board. But board members need to be completely bought into it all, and we all are. That's why we joined this organisation, and it needs to be at the centre for us. Experts by experience, that lived experience needs to be at the centre. And what we've found is that the processes actually get designed around the ethos, not the other way around. So you need your ethos first, and then you design your processes around it. And in our processes, we have inclusivity as our guiding principle. So we have half of the board is experts by experience, and half we call ourselves advocates by experience. So in the pre-meetings, our members with lived experience have more time to get familiar with the topics, ask questions, prepare for the board meeting. How we set our agenda is important, being clear on what each item is about, who will lead it, how we will approach that agenda item, what's expected. We use a workshop style approach at each meeting for the bigger items where we need longer discussions. We use breakout groups to make it easier for everyone to contribute. So we're really thinking here all the time about how do we make this inclusive. We give guidance to managers about how they present information to the board so that it's really accessible, that it's without jargon. We have someone who supports our experts by experience before and during the meetings to make sure we're being true to our ethos, calling us out when we've gone off on a ramble or into jargon, slowing things down if we've raced off, and supporting our experts by experience to speak up and ask questions. At the end of every meeting, we have 10-15 minutes where we talk about how accessible was this meeting, what worked well, what didn't work well, so that we're challenging ourselves all of the time. We think we're quite good at this, And we find that there's a lot of things that we don't get right, even though we've been doing it for years. In fact, that can be the issue. You know, we're always like, we could do this better, we could do this better. And also in how we produce our minutes, we use things like pictures, simple language, clear actions. All the time we're thinking about, you know, checking ourselves, making sure that we really, really are being inclusive. We also have a governance handbook that we produce that lays down all our ground rules and our values. So it's really clear and we can go back to that and it acts as guidance for us all. And in terms of what's important to get right, and I think I've heard it in everything people have been saying, is that complete buy-in to this way of doing things. It's not always easy. It takes more time, it takes more conscious effort. But we know that what we gain from having people with lived experience on our board, that insight, that challenge, that different range of perspectives is so valuable that we know it adds, that it's really worth it.
Thank you very much, and I love that thing because it comes back to what Naomi was saying, that she captured in the guidance about this culture of always trying to improve, that feeling like you can always do better with this work. You're never at perfection, are you? You can always move it on. So that's, thank you, Christina. That's a really good point to stop our speakers on. And I'm going to kind of throw it open now to people in the real room and people in the virtual room. So I'm looking for either comments or questions, and I'll try and swap Katie between the real room and the virtual room. So I'm going to start with the real room. Anybody want to ask a question or make a comment? Let me just stick up your hand. Yay, thank you. Do you just want to, when you get the microphone, can you just say like your name and who you work for, and then if it's to somebody specific on the panel, or if it's like a general point or question?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Louise Goulden and I'm the founder and chief executive of the Together project, and we run intergenerational programs to reduce loneliness and bring communities together. And I just wanted to, I guess, reflect on what everybody's been saying. We are a very small charity. There are 5 of us all working 3 to 4 days a week, and we work with a very diverse range of people. We work with people living in care homes, we work with very young children, we work with parents, and I founded the charity based on my experience of becoming a mum and experiencing that kind of disconnect. But I'm really aware that there are so many different experiences amongst our beneficiary group, and as a tiny charity, it feels quite overwhelming sometimes. I spend a lot of time beating myself up about the fact that actually we need people from this kind of, people that identify with this user group and this user group. And whilst some of this feels a bit, oh my goodness, we've got so much to do and all these things that you're doing are wonderful, I think I keep coming back to what a couple of you have said, that actually you've just got to start small, and those baby steps are enough. And with a small team, you know, everybody's going through funding challenges and all of these different things. I think it's easy to kind of look around and feel terrified by it all and beat yourself up, but actually focusing on one step at a time is the only way to go about it. So thank you to everybody for that kind of inspiration and reassurance.
That's lovely, thank you. Does anybody want to reflect back on that? I was actually going to look to Mo. Do you feel like just that thing about having a really wide range, a group of people who you're trying to bring in the voices of? How do you deal with that challenge? In a sentence, Mo.
I guess the best tool is listening. To listen to the people that you're that you're serving, that you're advocating for, and that you're working with, and making sure that those voices, those insights and expertise are there, are crucial in terms of advancing the cause that you're fighting for. So more than a sentence, sorry.
Oh no, I think that was pretty good actually. Thank you. Anybody else on the panel want to add to that?
Yeah, okay. So I've been Young Women's Trust. I'm part of furniture. I've been there for about 10 years now. And so I started a participation program there, and we didn't have anything. It was just me, we didn't have anything. Well, it wasn't actually just me at the time. I wasn't technically there. I was doing some consultancy work with them. But it really is about just starting small, just getting going, and like what Mo said, just bringing different people into the space, you know, just to kind of hear what they think about what it could look like for your organisation, and just being really sort of open and transparent that you are just trying things out, you want to kind of see how it goes, it might not work. And I think just again, kind of touching on what Zoe was saying about that level of accountability, just being really transparent about that, it just really, it goes so far. And I think as long as they're aware that, okay, well, we might start something over here and it might not work, but if they understand why it didn't work, they're usually okay with it. It's not disempowering in any way. They've been part of the process and the conversation from the start. So I think, yeah, just getting going, give it a go. That would be my advice.
Thank you. I'm going to see if we've got a question online, Katie.
Sure, we've got several questions coming through. I'm going to give you two at once if that's okay. So I think these are both very relevant to how we go about involving people. So the first one is, how do we reconcile the need to meet people where they are, and this particular person is working with young people recovering from trauma, balance that with involving people in more complex or strategic decision making that requires more of an ongoing conversation. So that's the first one, how to get that balance. And then the second one is that this person's experienced that often their projects are oversubscribed with people who really want to be involved in shaping the work. So how do we get that balance between addressing equitability versus including diversity of thought over time? So a couple of big questions there, but both really about getting that balance.
Two really good questions. So let's start with this thing about balancing the different ways that people might want to get involved. So very complex, shaping an organisational strategy, that's hard for all of us, whoever we are, through to, I just want to give a comment about this information leaflet or this service. So who wants to take that? I'm kind of looking at in person and online. Just either shout or stick your hand up. Becky, yay, thank you.
Hiya. Just a few thoughts about Young Women's Trust and what we do and how we get involved. Because we sit on the panel for about 2 years or so, or until we turn 30. So it's from young women 18 to 30, and there are many ways we can get involved. I think it's good that we have at least 20 of us at any one time on the panel, so we have a wide range of people to take on opportunities. But there's just a lot of things. I mean, there's obviously a load of things, like the staff make it very comfortable to feel like we don't feel like we have to say yes to everything. We receive support to access experiences or to get support afterwards if we need a nanny, if we need money for Wi-Fi or for a phone bill or whatever to access the event, or to get involved, even to share one comment. There's no expectation that we share our like life story every time we talk about something. We give what we can at the time, and I think the staff have really good understanding of the different levels people are at and can keep us kind of check in with us regularly, make sure that we're okay. Do we want to drop out? Do we still want to do this? What can we do to support you? There's always that feeling, there's that relationship we have, but we feel like we're supported. Well, I feel like I'm supported, and I feel like I could say, I can't do this. Oh, I'm feeling triggered. Oh, I need to step back from this. There are, you know, people at work there make a big difference. And knowing that there are other people that want to get involved, knowing that you're getting paid for your experience too, obviously is a huge thing, because that is a motivator, because a lot of us can't volunteer our time all the time, and that's, you know, knowing that your experience is valued, it can make it easier to be like, okay, that's a motivator, and you've got support of your team, and you've got colleagues or other panel members around you, knowing you can get mental health support afterwards if you need to, you can debrief, all these sort of things, just as a starting point. And there's loads more, obviously, but yeah, that's a few thoughts.
And I'm really glad you chose to answer that one, Becky, because you're a really good illustration of this, I think, in some ways, because you probably wouldn't, if the first time you got involved, Lydia had said to you, go and speak at that huge event, you probably would have felt like, no way, but now you can do it, you've moved, haven't you? So really interesting. Anybody else want to comment on that one, or shall I move on?
I mean,
Sharon.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. So we are in the process of developing a participation framework. Again, with Chapman that's been co-designed with the advisory panel, and we have a model of participation in there that we've put together as well. And I think one of the big things that came out from the advisory panel was this idea of we've been trying to depict the model, like illustrate the model. How should we make it look on page? And we kept coming back to the pyramid. But the panel kept saying to us, no, it's not, it just feels too like you're, you know, to work up to the top is like you're doing participation really well. Whereas actually it's really important, all the stuff, all the consultation down the bottom, as well as the co-designing and leading, all of it is equally important. And so the panel were really like pushing for us to make sure that we illustrate it in a way that it doesn't matter if you get involved at the top doing co-designing or leading, or you're just commenting on something, or taking part in a survey. It's all really, really important. So, and equally weighted. So, yeah.
Good illustration of why it's important to involve people. They have very sensible things to say, don't they? Yeah. So let's go on to this question about opportunities being oversubscribed, because I know that also happens a lot. Does anybody want to take that one? I've got the people online behind me, which is why I look weird online. I keep turning around. So anybody want to take this thing about how do you deal with offering opportunities that then you get lots more people wanting to take part in them can actually do it? Christina, thank you for putting your hand up.
Oh, hang on. Take my hand down again. Yeah, and that's really interesting, and that's been our experience as well, that people really want to get involved, and we employ people with lived experience, and so they have a facilitated group, and that we get feedback that gets fed up to the board. We also, my co-chair is someone with lived experience, so then they attend many of our drop-ins, and they go and they do kind of straw polls, asking questions. If there's questions from the board, they take them out and ask people at the drop-in. So we're looking at different channels. We've just set up a reference group because we felt that having half of the board experts by experience just wasn't allowing enough people to feed in, and so now we've set up a reference group for experts, so that they can then also be feeding up, working with things like strategy and things like that there's much more formal kind of focus for that. And as our board members step down, which has been happening as they've come to the end of their terms, they're now joining the reference group, so that we also don't lose their experience. So I think it's having those different channels, which I know can be really difficult to manage all of those things. But it's about that, and also getting volunteers for, like, we've got committees, different volunteers go on different committees depending on their interests. So it's managing all those different ways that people can feed in. Sometimes it's informal, sometimes it's more formal, and facilitating that.
And not involving just the same small group of people every time. Sounds like that's what you're doing really well. Thank you, Christina. Oh, good. I'm going to come here and then there to the back. And so, yeah, and I'm going to do this so that we can pass this one down.
Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm from an even smaller charity. Excellent. It's two questions about money. First one is, if you are a small charity with limited funds and you're worried about restricted and you have no real unrestricted resources, the buy-in stage one can actually be a barrier, even if you haven't even done anything yet, and people are like, well, we don't have the money for it. So I suppose my question is, how do you encourage buy-in, particularly at top level, when you're constantly worrying about how you're going to pay for core services, let alone something that feels like it could be optional? And my second question, so the nature of our organisation and how we run, and I think quite a lot of organisations do this, is we do charge a fee. Not a huge one, but bigger than that, but anyway, that's another story. But we do charge a fee to our beneficiaries, and of course our beneficiaries are the ones that we would want to involve. So are there challenges around the kind of power dynamic or the financial transaction relationship of we're charging a fee? Oh, but if you get involved, we'll pay your travel expenses. And there's something kind of going on there around the flow of money and how it's being spent. And which in that is that the people, the lived experience people are the people who are also helping. So there's a kind of challenge there. I don't know if my question makes sense, but.
I think it absolutely did make sense, Hannah. So let's pose the first question first about how do you do this work, or how do you start this work when you haven't got any money? Anybody want to comment on that?
Sorry. So young and chance, we're in a very good financial position. But what I would say is that I think it is definitely worth, looking outwards and seeing what other organisations similar to you, similar size, similar financial position, and if they're doing this work, having a conversation with them. I do really think it is just about hearing what other people are doing in the space and how they're making it work. You also said something really interesting about getting started.
Yeah, I was going to say this later on, but it seems like relevant now. So a lot of, I would say most charities and organisations will use lived experience in comms, right? So, you're probably already kind of there, like you already have a conduit to people who you're asking for lived experience anyway for another purpose. It doesn't potentially take more than a little step to get buy-in there, because it's like, well, we already have these people and we're already using their lived experience for something. We're just going to use it in a slightly different way. So if you frame it like that, it doesn't suggest that you're going to have to reinvent the wheel, right? So maybe that can help with that buy-in piece.
Thank you. Any of our panel online want to comment on that? My experience of working with people is, if you're very straight with them at the beginning and you say, I don't have any money, provided you don't keep doing that, then people are very understanding. They will have conversations. That's been my experience. They will have conversations with you, but they won't keep doing that if you don't tell them what you've done with that information and try to source some funding. I also think, and I think everybody on the panel would say, people should not be out of pocket for sharing their experience. They should, that's the minimum we should be aiming for. I've got Mo's hands up. Thank you, Mo.
That's a really good question, and I think that speaks to the reality of the charity sector in terms of resources and how we resource lived experience. And I think it also presents an opportunity on looking at structure and how one resources the charity and can open up really good creative opportunities for the board of trustees and working together on how can you actually have an opportunity to center lived experience, because I think the investment is crucial in this work, and then working backwards. In particular, if you're looking at a model where you want lived experience to be a sustainable model for the organization, and you can grow over time, it's crucial to invest that. And the worst case scenario is starting this process without appropriate resources, and then failing that, because essentially we're talking about trust and buy-in from lived experience, and in order to do that, that has to be embedded within the life of the organization.
Thank you, Mo. Really important points. And let's come on to Hannah's second question about power dynamics, because I know this, when people are thinking about this, you can kind of tie yourself up in knots with it. Like, you're offering to pay people who you're also helping, and you may in some cases be charging them for the help that you give. So anybody want to reflect on that? Anybody in the room or in the virtual? Yes. Are you going to reflect on it? Yeah.
Advertising maybe is my question, or maybe it's with yourself, potentially.
Go for it.
I'll try.
So start by saying who you are, who you work for.
Yeah, hi, Ron, and thank you to the panelists. It's been great. And you see that looking forward to reading the guidance. I'm Andy. I'm from the New Citizenship Project. We're a small consultancy, and we work with organisations who want to help us shift the story of the individual and society from consumer to citizen. And I guess from a lived experience perspective, what that often means is, or how we might describe it would be, if you only think of people as consumers, then people with lived experiences of injustices or health conditions are potentially just beneficiaries of services, and that's obviously important. Or maybe in a lived experience sense, at best, people you might extract things from in order to better shape what you're doing as an organisation over here, whilst everyone else just consumes your work, which is obviously what it feels like everyone in the room very much wants to move away from, and already is. When you think of people as citizens, then the role of people is to get involved, to help shape things, and the role of everyone here probably is to create the structures and processes to do that. And obviously we've had some great guidance, and we work with organisations who are already on that path. To respond to the PowerPoint, I think that comes up so much in the work. I don't think this is definitely an answer, but I guess if I think of it in that sense, by having people paying for a service that you're providing, there is obviously in many ways a sort of consumer relationship there, which is entirely important and needed, and very much is how you run the work. But if you think of it then in that citizen sense of like, how do you help people to step into their agency, their power to help you shape things and get involved, then it makes sense to be helping them in whatever way that you can do that. So whether it's funding things, it's helping people to do that, then I think that makes sense to me. But yeah, I don't know if that's in terms of responding. I had a question, if that's all right, but I don't want to stop anyone else from responding to any of that.
I think I'm going to take your question. I'm just going to say, because I think Becky said something earlier about how, I don't really like this word, but how empowering it is to be paid for your sharing your experience or offering your skills in whatever way. I think often people with lived experience come into a room, whether it's virtual or real, they're the only person sitting in the room who's not being paid to sit there. So it is very empowering if you can do it. What's your question, Andy?
Yeah, so I guess building off of that, we do a lot of work with organisations who come to us and want help locally in situations where they have the financial stability to be able to really focus and invest in this, and we help organisations who are in that position. I guess not to bring it to sort of what really the challenges are, because I want to keep it kind of in that appreciative space, but often we're working with these organisations who really get it. I think it feels like we all get the value of it. And I'm sure there's lots of the guidance around how do you kind of build that into what people, I guess how do I say this more concisely? How do we help more people to get it? Like,
yeah. How do we help more people to get it, and how good it is and how important it is? Zoe.
Thank you. Like I mentioned with the comms piece, I think the fact that you're kind of already doing it and you can point towards it and say, well, actually, we already use this for something. We can use it again for something else. I had another point, but I completely forgotten it.
Glad it's not just me.
Yeah, it might have to come back to me, but I had another.
Okay.
Sorry.
I feel like we grapple with this in the shared learning group a lot, and like how can we kind of really promote what we're doing, like so that other organisations that aren't in a position to do it or haven't really thought about it are doing it. It's like I mean, I don't know, I think it's a good question. I feel like there's probably, it'd be a really good question for us to come back to as a group, and I know potentially when we come together with the National Participation Forum as well around like, what can we do to really raise awareness of this and get it on the agenda for more organisations and also funders out there as well. But yeah, one to potentially come back to.
Yeah, I've remembered it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I find it like odd that you would have an organisation that was trying to like do good for people, or you know, in the environment or whatever, and not sort of think that they should be the ones that are telling you what the best thing to do is. But maybe people don't buy into that, I don't know. But I really think in terms of getting more buy-in, it's like it will make everything richer. I mean, that's the end. At the end of the day, you know, I know my own experience best in the case of Young Women's Trust. So surely, by using that, it will make everything better. Like the whole system will be richer because of it. Is maybe what I would say.
That's a good thing to remember to say. Thank you. I feel cheated actually. We've got to stop. And I feel like we could continue this discussion for at least another hour, and I'm really sorry, but I know that the people online are going to be leaving us at 10:30. So I just want to say a couple of things before they leave us. So first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who worked on the guide, but also who have spoken today. So thank you to Naomi, to Mo, Lydia, Zoe, Becky and Christina for being an amazing panel on tackling some really challenging questions. So well done. I want to thank the NPC staff for putting this together. Thanks again, we're doing well with this, but thank you again to the City Bridge Foundation, just name checking them again. Do go to the NPC website to download the guidance. Before you go, two things. One, thank you to everybody for joining, but the online people who are about to leave us, can you please not leave us yet? Because we just want to do one more Menti poll. So the number is, we should have put these on the slide. The number is 5979 5923. So that's 5979 5923, and there are two questions on that poll. So the first question, what one thing are you taking away from today's event? You could be here for 20 minutes writing a response to that, but what's the one thing that you're going to take away from today's event? There's some lovely things coming in here. Listening is the best tool we have. Yay, who said that? That was great. Importance of involvement, that is meaningful. Don't be overwhelmed with all the things you could do. Start small and build up. Embed it throughout the organisation. Lots of really, really interesting things coming up on this response. So thank you for those. We're going to have a look at those a bit later on, but thank you for those. And the second question, NPC are quite interested in whether they should run some kind of follow-up event to this, maybe in 6 months' time, because as we mentioned earlier, there's a couple of forums that do try and bring people together. Josh and I, along with colleagues, are working on something that would bring those two forums together, but NPC are also interested in whether you would be interested in some kind of follow-up event in 6 months' time. So please tick yes, or is it a yes or no question on that one? Yeah, just say yes or no, that's great. If you hated us, say no. Okay, so those people who are online, thank you very, very much for joining us, and you are now free to go. So we're just going to give a minute for the online people to leave us, and then if you are in the room, you get another 15 minutes. Yeah, thank you very much. Online panelists, I think you're going, but thank you so much to you. But thank you very, very much. See you.